secure top here, and these are 100 mysterious graves that were opened only once. 2600 BC Egypt, Saqqara. In the necropolis at Saqqara, dating to the 26th century BC, there are 24 granite sarcophagi, each carved from a single block of Aswan granite and weighing from 70 to 100 tons. These sarcophagi are located in the underground galleries of the Serapeum at a depth of more than 10 meters and were discovered in 1851 by the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette. Their inner surfaces are polished to a mirror finish with a tolerance of less than 0.01 ME, which matches the precision of modern CNC machines. Aswan granite has a hardness of 67 on the Mohs scale, and even today, working with it requires diamond tools, cooling, and constant pressure. However, the official version claims that the Egyptians used copper saws, sand, and manual labor. In 1995, engineer Christopher Dunn conducted measurements of the sarcophagi and showed that the inner corners form perfect 90-degree angles. And the surfaces do not have the waviness that is inevitable with manual processing. Such parameters are impossible without machine rotation and a stabilized tool. The strangest thing is that the sarcophagi were not used. Lids weighing up to 30 tons were moved, but inside no mummies, no inscriptions, and no ritual traces were found, which completely contradicts the purpose of tombs. These objects do not fit into either the religious practices or the technological capabilities of the Old Kingdom, and to this day, there is no explanation for how they were carved. They were transported from Aswan over a distance of 800 kilometers and installed in narrow underground corridors with a clearance of just a few centimeters. And this is not an isolated case. In Giza, in the so-called Granite Temple, there are blocks weighing up to 200 tons fitted together without mortar, with gaps of less than a millimeter. Surface analysis shows traces of high-speed cutting that do not match the tools known from the 3rd millennium BC. Egypt has been officially dated, studied, and described, but there are still too many objects that look like traces of another technological culture that existed long before the pharaohs and disappeared without a trace. A family of warriors from the 9th century. In Hungary, archaeologists discovered 3 warrior burials dating to around 920 to 930. At first glance, these are ordinary graves from the early Middle Ages, but analysis revealed a detail that drastically changes the picture. All 3 were related through the male line, most likely a father and 2 sons. The burial inventory indicates war, high status, a saber, a bow with a quiver, decorated harness, silver and gold elements of clothing, dozens of coins. One of the young men died at 17 or 18 years old, the other even earlier. The eldest died at about 30 years old. All 3 mainly ate meat, which confirms that they belong to the military elite. The coins found in the graves come from northern Italy and date back to the reign of King Berengar. This matches the time of the Hungarian military campaigns to the west, which is likely where the family got their loot. The burial reflects a strong military lineage connected to origin, campaigns, and power. The weapons, jewelry, and inventory suggest elite status and involvement in additional campaigns. The coincidence of dates, kinship through the male line, and the nature of the burials identify a family integrated into the military structure of the early state. A ship beneath the streets of Manhattan, New York, the city that never sleeps, a symbol of modernity and the triumph of concrete. But what if I told you that right now, beneath your feet, of thousands of passers-by, 6 meters below the asphalt of Manhattan, lie remains that are older than the United States itself? This story began in 1613. A Dutch trading ship called the Tiger, under the command of Captain Adrian Block, dropped anchor in the harbor that would later become New York Harbor. These were the early years of exploring the region, long before skyscrapers appeared here. But the expedition ended in disaster. A fire broke out on board, and the Tiger turned into a blazing torch, slowly sinking to the bottom off the coast of the island. 300 years passed. In 1916, workers laying a subway line under Manhattan suddenly came across massive charred logs. Imagine their shock. They expected to see bedrock or dirt, but instead they found the skeleton of an ancient ship entombed deep in the ground. At that time, technology didn't allow for a detailed analysis. The find was simply handed over to a museum where it gathered dust for decades. But in 2025, archaeologists and dendrochronologists decided to reopen the investigation. The main question, is this really the legendary tiger? Scientists use dendrochronology to analyze the annual rings of trees. Each ring is a kind of genetic code of time. Researchers Martha N. Manders and Martha Dominguez Delmos are studying 8 feet of keel and frames. If the rings show that the tree was cut down in the Netherlands at the very beginning of the 17th century, it will become a worldwide sensation. But how did the ship end up in the middle of dry land, 6 meters from the shore? The answer lies in the greed and ambition of the first settlers. The Dutch and later the British desperately needed new land for construction. They found no better solution than to expand the island by dumping soil, construction debris, and even old boats directly into the water beyond the shoreline. The shoreline was pushed back, and the sunken tiger gradually became trapped, buried under layers of artificial land. At the excavation site, along with the ship, they also found other artifacts: a Dutch broad-bladed axe, trade beads, clay pipes, and even a small cannon. These items are not just trash. They are traces of the first contacts between Europeans and the Lenape tribe. It was the Native Americans who helped Captain Blogg survive after the fire and build a new ship, on which he was the first in history to map the East River and the Long Island Sound. Today, the tiger is not just a piece of rotten wood, it is the patient zero of New York's history. And if research confirms its authenticity, we will have physical proof of how the modern metropolis grew on the bones and ruins of the old world. The tomb of Ketaliki.
Не открывают.
Everyone knows about the Sphinx, but almost no one knows that there is probably a cavity beneath it, sealed and even partially filled in with concrete. Back in the 1990s, geophysicist Tomasz Dobecki conducted acoustic sounding of the plateau. Under the front paws of the Sphinx, an anomaly was discovered, a hollow chamber with clear rectangular edges. It couldn't have been a natural formation. It was a room or a tomb or something else. This news shook the world of alternative archaeology. The claims went even further. Allegedly, ancient Egyptian texts mentioned a certain hall of records, a place where knowledge left by the gods before the flood was kept. And it could have been located right there, under the Sphinx. One step, and we could have opened the door to prehistory. But instead, there was silence. The Egyptian authorities did not grant permission for excavations, and the site was declared closed for research. Moreover, according to unconfirmed reports, the shaft at the base of the Sphinx was filled with concrete, just like that, without any explanation. Why? It's unclear. Perhaps not because there's nothing there, but because they know exactly what is there. The staircase of the giants of Antarctica. One of the most discussed discoveries made through satellite monitoring was a structure in the Enderby Land region. At the coordinates 68 degrees, 54 minutes south latitude and 88 degrees, 42 minutes east longitude, an object was discovered that was named the Staircase of the Giants. It is a series of massive stone steps that emerge from a creeping glacier and descend steeply down the slope. The total length of the visible part of the structure is more than 200 meters, and it does not fit into the surrounding landscape at all. The main argument in favor of the artificial origin of this object is its geometry. Each step is exactly 14 meters wide and about 4 meters high. Unlike natural terraces, which are formed by erosion or landslides, here we see perfectly flat horizontal platforms and vertical cuts at a 90-degree angle. Geologists officially call this a stepped glacier, but ice, when moving, cannot maintain the shape of a clear rectangle for decades. The material of the object is dark andesite, an extremely dense rock that was used to build megalithic complexes in Peru and Bolivia. The scale of the Staircase of Giants is impressive. If these are indeed the remains of an ancient structure, then it surpasses the largest Inca foundations in size. Scientists from Pennsylvania State University, during their analysis of shadows and images from 2026, confirmed that there are virtually no gaps between the blocks, which indicates a precise fitting of the stone. The fact that the object is located at an altitude of 2,000 meters above sea level makes the theory of its creation by any civilization known to us impossible. This is physical evidence that in ancient times, When Antarctica was not yet buried under ice, there were megastructures here, the scale of which we are only beginning to realize. Access to this area is strictly limited today, and the coordinates of the object are often blurred on commercial maps. This only fuels the interest of independent researchers. A bloody trail and the megastructures of the desert. Archaeology often resembles an investigation into a mass murder case where the statute of limitations expired thousands of years ago. In Serbia, in a place called Gomolava, scientists opened a shallow pit and discovered a real nightmare: the remains of 77 people piled together. The first assumption was an ancient epidemic or famine, but when bioarchaeologists cleaned the bones from the soil, the disease theory fell apart. More than half of the dead were children from 1 to 12 years old, and most of the adults were women, and all of them had the same mark of death: unhealed injuries on the back and top of the skull. It wasn't a fair fight. People were killed from behind as they tried to run away. Genetic analysis added even more mysteries. Out of 77 people, only 3, a mother and her 2 daughters, were related. All the others were strangers to each other, having grown up in different regions. This wasn't a clearing of a single village, but a targeted hunt for demographic groups. A mass execution from the 19th century BC whose cause lay buried for 3,000 years. But if in Serbia we see traces of human cruelty, then in the sands of Africa, archaeologists find traces of human madness on a different scale. Everyone knows about the Great Pyramids of Egypt, but few have heard that there are twice as many in Sudan. The Nubian Desert holds the legacy of the Black Pharaohs of the Kush civilization, which at its peak controlled territories from the Nile Delta to modern-day Khartoum. Here in Meroe, there are more than 2,000 pyramids. They are smaller than the Egyptian ones, ranging from 6 to 30 meters in height. But their architecture is unique: narrow bases and incredibly steep walls at a 70-degree angle. The Kushites began building them when Egypt had already abandoned this idea due to an economic catastrophe. The burial chambers here were overflowing with gold, Greek glass, and Roman ceramics, confirming that the forgotten pyramids of Sudan were once a center of global trade, until civil wars and sand wiped them off the map. However, even the ambitions of the pharaohs had their limits. To see in Aswan. There, in the granite quarries, lies the unfinished obelisk, the largest monolith ever attempted to be raised by man. If it had been completed, this giant would have soared 42 meters into the sky and weighed 1,200 tons. That's like 3 fully loaded Boeing 747s carved from a single piece of rock. Scientists believe that the project was overseen by the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. Thousands of workers spent years chiseling the hardest granite with dolerite balls, freeing the giant from the rock centimeter by centimeter. But at one point, everything collapsed. When the obelisk was nearly ready to be separated from the rock, a crack appeared, undoing all the effort with a single flaw in the stone. The builders dropped their tools and left, giving us a unique blueprint of ancient technologies. Traces of wedges and markings are still visible on the surface, showing exactly how the Egyptians planned to overcome gravity. The obelisk still lies in its stone cradle, a symbol of ambitions that proved stronger than the abilities of even the greatest builders of antiquity. The Gebelein murder. For almost 100 years, this story looked like an ordinary museum display. In the British Museum, there lay a naturally mummified pre-dynastic man from Gebelein, dated to around 3,400 BC. He was found back in the late 19th century in a sandy grave, where the heat and dry air preserved the body without embalming. On the surface, everything looked peaceful. No signs of disaster, no obvious injuries. Just a young man who lived a short life and ended up in the sand. But in 2012, they decided to give him a CT scan, as if it were a modern investigation. And in the images, things became visible that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Under the left shoulder blade, they found a puncture and then a series of injuries that fit into a single scenario. The blow came from behind with great force. The blade went so deep that it damaged the shoulder blade, broke a rib, and entered the lung. According to experts, the length of the blade could have been at least 12 centimeters and the width about 2 centimeters. Not a random stab, but a real blade. The coldest thing about this discovery isn't even the wound, but the details surrounding it. He was about 18 to 20 years old. The body was strong, with developed muscles and no signs of prolonged illness. One more detail caught the researchers' attention. There were no typical injuries on the hands that appear when a person tries to defend themselves or grabs a weapon. It looks very much like a blow he didn't have time to see coming. It's a strange thing. The pyramids were still thousands of years away. It was still a long time before laws, courts, and official records. Yet violence was already being recorded in the body just as clearly as in modern forensics. And this death didn't become a legend, wasn't recorded in text, and didn't turn into a myth. It simply lay in the sand, then in a museum, and then one day showed up on a scan, like a confession that had been kept for 5,000 years. Tropical forests of Antarctica. The Prince Charles Mountains in East Antarctica are the largest geological archive on the planet. It was here, among the sheer cliffs of McRobertson Land, that scientists found tangible evidence that the current state of the continent is an anomaly. In the layers of sedimentary rocks, geologists discovered fossilized forests preserved in perfect condition. We're talking about plants of the genus Glossopteris, which dominated here about 260 million years ago during the Permian period. These trees reached 30 meters in height and formed dense forests in conditions that seem impossible today. A group of researchers led by Eric Gulbranson from the University of Wisconsin conducted a detailed analysis of these findings. It turned out that the wood preserved its cellular structure to such an extent that traces of ancient fungi and microorganisms were found in it, literally frozen in time. The preservation of the tissue was so high that scientists were able to extract a fragment of amino acids from the cells, which are over 250 million years old. Such a degree of organic preservation is only possible with extremely rapid burial of biomass. In geology, such cases are associated with rapid burial events, when volcanic ash or powerful sediment flows block oxygen access even before the processes of decay begin. This turns the Prince Charles Mountains into a giant time capsule. The discovered trunk segments preserved annual rings, which show that the trees grew at an incredible rate using the round-the-clock daylight of the polar summer, and then abruptly transitioned into a state of anabiosis. An additional fact is the colossal coal deposits discovered in this same region. Coal is concentrated biomass that forms only from 1 million tons of undecomposed rotting plants. The presence of coal seams in central Antarctica confirms that the continent was once the planet's biological reactor. The scale of these discoveries indicates that the freezing of the continent was not the result of a gradual climate decline, but a sudden end to life, traces of which now have to be extracted from stone at extremely low temperatures. Mummies of the dry valleys. The McMurdo. Dry valleys are 30,000 square kilometers of land, where there has been no precipitation for the last 2 million years. It is here that archaeologists and biologists find hundreds of mummified remains of cray-beater seals and Weddell seals. The main mystery lies in the location. The bodies of the animals are found up to 66 kilometers from the nearest open water and at an altitude of more than 1,200 meters above sea level. Radiocarbon analysis of these finds gives a date range from 30 years to 3,000 years. Due to the extreme dryness and the almost complete absence of putrefactive bacteria, the bodies do not decompose but undergo a process of natural preservation. The body turns into a hard, parchment-like substance, and the internal organs remain unchanged for centuries. However, official science still cannot explain the mechanism of collective suicide. To reach the place of their death, the pinnipeds had to travel dozens of kilometers over sharp rocks and icy hummocks, moving deep into the lifeless continent where there is no food at all. During research conducted in 1970, it was found that many of the mummies are oriented with their heads in the same direction, toward the interior of the continent. Biologists from Oregon State University found that the carbon-14 isotope content in some samples indicates the so-called reservoir effect. A seal's marine diet can age their tissues by thousands of years, which makes accurate dating extremely difficult. This means that what appear to be 3,000-year-old mummies in the valleys could actually be the remains of creatures from much more ancient eras. The presence of so many travelers going nowhere points to a major failure in the navigation system or to the existence of mummies deep within the dry valleys. Some factor has been forcing marine animals to leave their territory for certain death for centuries. A family crypt in the city center. In Martwick, Britain, Next to the All Saints Church, the ground suddenly collapsed. At first, they thought it was just a regular sinkhole after heavy rains. But when the workers cleared the edge of the pit, it became clear. Beneath the surface, there was a stone room, an 18th century family crypt that no one had seen for about 300 years. The crypt is built from local hamstone, the same kind that is now quarried in only 2 places in England. Inside, there should be shelves with 4 burials from one family. It's still unclear who was buried here. Church records are under review. But there is a tomb from 1760 nearby, and by the style of the masonry, it's clear that this belongs to the same period. Priest Paul Filler said that the rains washed away the foundation and the crypt's ceiling simply couldn't hold. No human remains are visible yet. Everything is covered with a mix of gravel, soil, and debris, but the very fact that the crypt stood unnoticed in the center of the village for centuries surprises even archaeologists. Tombs of this type were a sign of status. The family it belonged to was most likely wealthy, perhaps the Pitardi tanners, who were well known in this area.
Поющие саркофаги Серапеума.
Beneath the sands of Saqqara lies a 300-meter-long gallery. In its side niches stand 40 granite boxes, each weighing over 60 tons. Egyptologists call them the sarcophagi of the sacred Apis bulls. Inside, they are almost empty, with only rare bone fragments. But the main thing here is the acoustics. When acoustics experts from Massachusetts first turned on a low-frequency generator inside one of the boxes, in 2019, the granite began to sing, a perfect pure tone of 110 hertz, which matches the resonant frequency of the human chest. If you stand inside, the sound literally vibrates in your bones. Ancient priests could have used this to put themselves and possibly bulls into an altered state. But then why would the lid be half a meter thick, polished on the inside to a mirror finish? There's a hypothesis. The boxes were not tombs, but resonators that amplified the vibrations of the earth. Their polished inner surface reflected sound multiple times, creating standing waves. Some researchers suggest that the complex might have contained an entire acoustic organ, a system of chambers tuned to different frequencies. If that's the case, the Serapeum is not a cemetery, it's an ancient laboratory of acoustic energy. Shoes for eternal victory. Archaeologists often find items that were not made for life, but for triumph in the afterlife. In 1922, Howard Carter discovered thousands of artifacts in Tutankhamun's tomb, but among dozens of pairs of shoes, one stood out as special. This is a pair of leather sandals dated to 1300 BC. Their size corresponds to a modern size 44, but the value is not in the dimensions. It's in what is depicted on the insoles. The sole under the pharaoh's foot is covered with images of bound captives, representing the 9 bows, ancient Egypt's traditional enemies. The sandals are made of wood, covered with veneer, leather, and gold foil. At the toes and heel, bows are depicted, symbols of hostile peoples. The artifact's meaning was simple and harsh. Every step Tutankhamun took in the afterlife was to trample his enemies into the ground. Even on the pharaoh's mummy, golden finger covers and sandals made of pure gold were found. This was a world where the ruler's power was confirmed not only by armies, but also by symbolic superiority, and that superiority was meant to last forever. Why are the pyramids empty? The Great Pyramids of Giza are still officially called the tombs of the pharaohs. This version is so familiar that it is rarely questioned. The problem is that after 2 centuries of research, not a single ruler's body has been found inside the pyramids of the 4th dynasty. No mummies, no burial complexes, no traces of burials that could be clearly linked to the pharaohs. The stone sarcophagi found inside turned out to be empty. The walls lack painted inscriptions, in sharp contrast to the richly decorated tombs of later periods. Narrow shafts, hidden chambers, and complex internal geometry looked more like an engineering system than a space for burial rituals. Even in antiquity, this sparked debates. Herodotus wrote that Cheops was supposedly buried in an underground chamber connected to the Nile by a canal. But modern ground-penetrating radars have not detected such structures. Diodorus Siculus suggested that the pharaohs deliberately left the pyramids empty, fearing looting, and chose other places for their burials. But then a new oddity arises. If the pyramids were looted, why did only the bodies disappear and not the statues? In the Pyramid of Khafre, there is still a massive diorite statue, an object that looters could have destroyed or taken away first. In the Valley of the Kings, on the contrary, mummies were preserved and even reburied after robberies. The scale of construction also raises additional questions. Pharaoh Sneferu built 3 large pyramids at once. That's too many for personal tombs. But it makes perfect sense for a state program with a different purpose. Some passages are oriented towards specific stars, and the proportions of the structures indicate complex cosmological concepts. That's why alternative theories are becoming more common. Pyramids as symbolic monuments, astronomical markers, elements of religious infrastructure, or architectural embodiments of the idea of the ruler's ascension. There is still no answer. There are only empty chambers, perfect geometry, and we still don't fully understand the purpose of these structures. A grim burial. In Spain, archaeologists have discovered a unique burial site about 6,000 years old. 2 massive stone tombs were the burial place for more than 20 men, women, and children. These findings stand out because of their unusual funeral rituals. The flesh of the deceased was removed immediately after death, and the bones were broken in several places. Scientists discovered multiple fractures on the hands and cut marks on the bones, indicating that the flesh was removed with stone tools. This could have been done to speed up the decomposition process of the bodies. However, the true reasons remain a mystery. It is possible that some bones were used as relics or in burial rituals associated with cannibalism, which is also characteristic of the Upper Paleolithic in northwestern Europe. Lacquered coffin. In 2018, archaeologists in Jiangsu Province, China, discovered a unique 700-year-old lacquered coffin from the Yuan dynasty. Its bright red surface has been perfectly preserved thanks to the multi-layer lacquer coating, which protected the wood from moisture and decay. Lacquered coffins were a symbol of high status in China, and their creation required complex techniques. The lacquer was applied in several layers and then polished to a shine. This method of preservation allowed the coffin to survive for centuries with almost no damage. The discovery is also important because the Yuan dynasty left relatively few burials, and this coffin can tell us a lot about the burial traditions of that time. Elongated skulls of the Antarctic plateaus. In 2014, the news about a discovery in the La Playa area caused a media sensation, and it is still considered one of the most closely guarded secrets of modern anthropology. A group of researchers discovered 3 human skulls frozen into ancient layers of ice. The scientists were not shocked by the presence of people in the icy desert, but by their physical form. These skulls had an extremely elongated back of the head, a trait known in science as dolichocephaly. Similar artifacts were previously found in Peruvian Paracas and in ancient tombs of Egypt. Official science usually attributes such anomalies to ritual head binding in infancy. However, the Antarctic find has a critical difference. The cranial capacity of these specimens is 25% larger than that of an ordinary human. It is physically impossible to achieve this by simply compressing the bones. A brain of such mass simply would not fit into a standard human skull. The find in the La Playa area completely shatters the theory that Antarctica was only discovered in the 19th century. The presence of people with specific genetics here suggests a direct link between the continent and the higher castes of ancient South American and Middle Eastern civilizations. Researchers are asking, was Antarctica the center of this global culture? Where did knowledge of the genetic code spread to the rest of the world from? The strangest thing happened after the initial analysis. The area where the remains were discovered was immediately closed to visitors, and information about the find disappeared from official press releases, replaced by standard meteorological observation reports. But independent experts are convinced that these 3 skulls are just the tip of the iceberg. If entire burial sites of beings whose intelligence and physiology surpass ours are hidden under the ice, it explains why the world's leading powers so fiercely guard access to the Antarctic plains. The golden explosion before history. In 1972, on the outskirts of the Bulgarian city of Varna, workers were digging a trench for a cable, an ordinary industrial area, a random landscape, but suddenly something flashed brightly in the excavator's bucket. The workers stopped, expecting to find a World War II treasure, or at best Roman coins. But what they pulled out of the ground made historians around the world rewrite entire chapters of textbooks. It wasn't just a treasure, it was a huge necropolis, a city of the dead, belonging to a culture about which science knew almost nothing. But the most shocking thing was its age. 4,600 BC. Just think about it. When the pyramids of Egypt were being built, these findings were already 2,000 years old. When Stonehenge was just being designed, the gold of Varna was already an ancient relic. This is the oldest processed gold in human history discovered to date. Grave number 43 is central to this discovery. It contained a man about 45 years old whose body was literally immersed in gold. Archaeologists counted more than 900 gold items with a total weight of 1.5 kilograms. Gold bracelets, massive necklaces, arrowheads, and even a gold sheath for the penis. In his hands, he held a stone axe wrapped in gold foil, a symbol of absolute power. So what is the main mystery for scientists in 2026? For a long time, it was believed that ancient Europe of that era was egalitarian, meaning people lived in equal communities without kings or servants. The famous archaeologist Maria Gumbatus even created a theory about old Europe, where women ruled and society was peaceful and harmonious. But Varna dealt a crushing blow to this theory. An analysis of 294 graves conducted using modern technology revealed a grim reality. Enormous wealth was concentrated in the hands of just 45 people. The rest of the hundreds of people were buried with almost nothing, just a couple of flint knives and bone ornaments. This is the first documented social inequality in history. We see the moment of the birth of an elite that took everything for themselves. But there is something even more frightening. Some of the graves in Varna were empty. They contained gold ornaments, scepters, and even life-size clay masks. But there were no bones. These are cenotaphs, symbolic burials. Who were they burying? Those who died in a distant war? Or were these rituals to summon deities? And the greatest mystery is the end of this golden empire. Around 4000 BC, life in Varna ends abruptly. There are no signs of battles or burned houses. A civilization with advanced metalworking and smelting technology vanished without a trace. According to recent research, the reason was climatic. The level of the Black Sea rose sharply, turning fertile valleys into salty lagoons. The Golden Kings of Varna probably saw their empire going underwater and were powerless to do anything about it. Today, some of their settlements are actually on the seafloor, keeping the secrets of the first Stone Age oligarchs. Funerary bread of ancient Egypt. In the foundation offering of Hatshepsut's tomb, archaeologists discovered bread that had been there for about 3,500 years. These items date back to the New Kingdom era and were placed in the foundation as part of the ritual that accompanied the construction of the sacred space. In ancient Egypt, such offerings included food, vessels, and tools, which were sealed into the buildings at the foundation level, connecting them with the gods and with the fate of the deceased. Bread symbolized provision, order, and continuous existence. It was not intended for consumption and was not considered a food supply. Its shape and structure were preserved thanks to isolation in the dry climate. Analysis showed coarse grain milling and impurities, which are characteristic of bread made for ritual purposes. An untouched tomb with ornaments. During the excavations in the northern part of Budapest, archaeologists came across a stone sarcophagus that looked as if it had been sealed just yesterday. No signs of break-in or attempts at reuse, a rarity for the Roman Empire in the 4th century, where tombs were often opened and reused. Here, however, the lid was sealed so securely that no one doubted archaeologists were in for a surprise. Inside the sarcophagus lay the neatly arranged skeleton of a young woman. Nearby were glass vessels, delicate bronze figurines, a bone hairpin, an amber pendant, and about 140 coins. Even remnants of fabric with gold thread were preserved. Ancient clothing rarely survives for centuries, so archaeologists quickly recognized the grave belonged to an extraordinary person. The young woman belonged to a wealthy social class, possibly to the family of an administrator of Aquincum, a Roman city on the Danube. In ancient times, legions were stationed here, trade routes passed through, and life thrived on the border of the empire. The sarcophagus was found among the ruins of houses near Aquincum and several other burials, but none of them can compare in wealth and preservation to this tomb. When clearing the bottom of the sarcophagus, specialists found a layer of dirt about 4 centimeters thick. They sift it carefully because in such places miniature ornaments are often left behind: earrings, buckles, pins. It's possible that some of them are still hidden there. Even after 1,700 years, it's clear that the girl was buried with great care. Finds like these remind us that behind every ancient tomb, there is a real life and people who loved that person. The genetic code of forbidden evolution. The most frightening discovery in recent years was not a physical object, but something revealed through molecular analysis. In 2026, a group of biologists working with samples of ancient soil extracted from beneath the ice sheet of Victoria Land reported the results of DNA sequencing. The samples contained fragments of proteins and genetic sequences that baffled laboratories around the world. Almost 15% of the discovered genetic material has no analogs in the International GenBank database, which contains information about every known living organism on the planet. These are not just new species of microbes. The complexity of the discovered sequences indicates that they belong to highly organized, multicellular organisms. Researchers in Kalari are talking about parallel evolution. These creatures' genetic code is fundamentally unlike anything that has evolved on other continents in hundreds of thousands of years. These are not humans, not primates, and not even mammals in the usual sense. It gives the impression that in Antarctica, there existed a completely different branch of life, which was wiped from the face of the Earth, along with the onset of the Ice Age. Some scientists suggest that beneath the ice, a biological archive of the first humanity has been preserved, a sentient race that dominated the planet long before the appearance of Cro-Magnons. If that's the case, then Antarctica was their last stronghold, where they tried to preserve their species in the face of the advancing cold. Official reports today are extremely cautious in their wording, referring to these discoveries as unidentified biological signatures. But for independent researchers, the conclusion is obvious. We are searching for traces of other civilizations in distant space, while beneath our feet in Antarctica lie the proofs that we have never been the only masters of this planet. These genes continue to sleep in the permafrost, waiting for the moment when the ice finally melts and returns them to the modern biosphere. Traces of megafires. In 2021, an international group of researchers published in the journal Polar Research the results of an analysis of sedimentary rocks collected on James Ross Island. In the layers belonging to the Upper Cretaceous period, large deposits of charcoal were discovered. This is irrefutable evidence that about 75 million years ago, Antarctica was engulfed by extremely powerful fires. Fires destroyed hectares of forests made up of coniferous and flowering plants during an era when the continent was still part of the supercontinent Gondwana and had a moderately warm climate. The main question scientists do not have a clear answer to is the cause and intensity of the fires. James Ross Island is located at 64 degrees south latitude and 58 degrees west longitude. Analysis of the reflectivity of the discovered charcoal showed that the burning temperature at the epicenters exceeded 1,000 degrees. For comparison, an ordinary forest fire rarely reaches such values. Such temperatures are typical either for the fall of large meteorites or for the most powerful volcanic eruptions with the release of pyroclastic flows. The problem with the official version is that the studied layers did not contain enough volcanic ash or tektites, indicating a cosmic impact. This means that the forests of Antarctica burned with incredible fury, which does not fit into the climate models of that time. The density of soot in the deposits indicates that the fires could have been global in nature, literally burning out the biological foundation of the continent. This discovery turns Antarctica into the site of a global catastrophe that occurred long before the onset of glaciation. We see traces of aggressive destruction of life, the causes of which are still hidden in the ancient layers of charred wood. A person can't fit in there. Inside the Great Pyramid, there are strange passages that for decades were considered ventilation shafts. But the problem is that neither air nor a person could pass through there. These shafts start in the so-called Queen's Chamber and extend upward at a sharp angle, ending in stone plugs with copper fittings. At first, they weren't even taken seriously, but then a robot was sent in there. In 1993, engineer Rudolf Gentenbring designed a mechanism that was able to crawl inside. It crawled along the smooth walls as if the shaft had been specially polished, At the end of the path, the robot came across a stone slab with two pins that looked like door handles. It seemed like something was hidden behind it, but it was urgently recalled. The archaeologists remained silent. The Egyptian authorities did not grant permission for a second attempt, and Gentenbring was simply removed from the project. The second robot, launched later, made a tiny hole, and behind it there was another chamber. It's unclear whether it was empty or if no one wants to say what was found inside. These shafts couldn't have been used during life. They're too narrow, but they're perfect for storing something that was meant to remain untouched. The secret to survival in the ice hell. We're used to thinking of ancient people as primitive, but 12,000 years ago in the caves of Oregon, they were solving problems that today only engineers could handle. Archaeologists found fragments of clothing made from moose hide there. This is the oldest workwear in history, and its existence is the main reason our species survived at all. 45,000 years ago, modern humans became the only ones who dared to live permanently above the 45th parallel. This is a zone of extreme cold where biodiversity is zero. In such conditions, clothing is not an accessory, but a survival technology. Scientists have proven that in an icy climate, complex, form-fitting clothing is more important than food. You can survive without calories for weeks, but cold can kill you in hours. The choice of material in Oregon was perfect. They used small game for traps, but clothing was made strictly from moose. Its hide is thicker and has phenomenal thermal insulation. Researchers found not only scraps of fur in the caves, but also fragments of ropes, complex trigger mechanisms for catching rabbits, and tools made from different types of wood. It was a real industry. People weren't just surviving, they were creating systems that allowed them to dominate where other species perished. But while some were battling the cold, others in France were revolutionizing art. In the Chauvet cave, an image of a bear was found that is 32,000 years old. Its technique is astonishing. The artist used only 14 lines. This is pure minimalism. To give the animal volume, the master used shading, smudging the pigment with his fingers or a piece of hide. Just a couple of strokes, and before us is a living predator with character and power. These two discoveries, the skin fragments and the Chauvet drawing, reveal two sides of our past. One shows precise calculation and advanced sewing that helped us conquer the North. On the other hand, it was the birth of the human spirit when a hunter, between battles for survival, found time to create a world-class masterpiece. Boats for eternity. Funerary boats appeared in Egypt as early as the 4th millennium BC, 1,000 years before the first dynasties. The earliest finds have been recorded in Abydos and Hierakonpolis, where real wooden boats up to 20 meters long were discovered next to elite burials, laid in specially dug pits. They were oriented along the course of the Nile, which indicates a deliberate ritual rather than random placement. In Abydos, archaeologists found more than a dozen boat burials located next to the tombs of proto-dynastic rulers. Some boats were dismantled before burial, while others had been used during their owners' lifetimes. They show traces of repairs, wear, and paint. This means that what was placed in the grave was not a symbol, but an object directly connected to the owner's status. In a society where the Nile was the main transportation artery, a boat meant control over movement, trade, and people. Images of boats also appear widely on pre-dynastic pottery, the same type of hull, high prow, elongated shape. These motifs are found simultaneously in different regions. The boat becomes a symbol of power and belonging to the elite, not just a means of transportation. Later, this idea doesn't disappear, but is scaled up. The solar boats of the pharaohs near the pyramids are not a new invention, but a development of a much more ancient ritual. Funerary boats capture the moment when power and status begin to be seen as something that should be preserved even after death. And for this, society is willing to spend resources that have no practical value for the living. Shamans. On the banks of the Tigris River in Turkey, archaeologists discovered a 12,000-year-old burial that may belong to a female shaman. Her remains were found in the Neolithic settlement of Çemköyük. Next to her were the skeletons of wild animals, partridge wings, marten paws, goat or sheep bones, and an aurochs skull. Researchers suggest that the woman may have been a mediator between the world of humans and spirits. Shamans played an important role in ancient societies, conducting rituals and possessing unique powers. The burial was carefully sealed with a limestone slab, which may indicate a fear of the possible return of the deceased woman. There is a theory that she was considered special or even dangerous to society. Archaeologists will conduct DNA and isotope analysis of the bones to find out who she was, what she ate, and what role she played in her tribe. The strange statues of Ain Ghazal. On the outskirts of Amman, on the hill of Ain Ghazal, archaeologists found something that still sparks debate. The statues are about 9,000 years old. This is one of the earliest examples of human sculptures in history, but they look as if they were created not by Neolithic people, but by an avant-garde artist. The statues are made of reeds, coated with plaster, and painted. The eyes are striking, large, dark, and disproportionate. The faces are flat and elongated. Sometimes two heads are placed on one body. There are figures of men, women, and even children, but they all have the same expression, an almost hypnotic face. What puzzles scientists is that these statues were not made for display. They were carefully buried, placed in pits, and covered up. That is, they were ritual objects, but exactly what kind is unclear. There are theories that these are images of ancestors, household guardians, or even attempts to recreate the deceased, whose real skulls were buried separately and covered with plaster. The strangest thing is the scale. Whole groups of about 10 figures have been found, as if they were created all at once for some single ritual, and each one is unique. Today, these statues are called the most unsettling faces of the Neolithic. An artifact from a deep core. Antarctic exploration history includes many official reports, but the most fascinating discoveries are often in explorers' diaries and closed archives. One such mystery is an incident that occurred in the 1960s during the first deep drilling operations near the Vostok station. Soviet scientists, while extracting ice cores from several hundred meters deep, discovered something inside the ice that shouldn't have been there. In the transparent mass of frozen water, estimated to be tens of thousands of years old, a very thin metal thread was found. At first glance, it resembled an ordinary human hair, but it had characteristics that did not match any known alloy of that time. The researchers who conducted the initial examination noted the object's phenomenal strength. It was impossible to tear the thread by hand, and its surface showed no signs of corrosion, despite direct contact with moisture for thousands of years. The technology of the 1960s was limited, but preliminary spectral analysis showed the presence of rare earth metals and isotopes that are almost never found in pure form in the Earth's crust. The key point is the depth where it was found. The thread was found in a layer of ice that formed long before the start of the Industrial Revolution, and even before the emergence of the first known civilizations of Mesopotamia. This eliminated the chance of accidental contamination during drilling. According to the official version, the find was classified as an anomalous inclusion of space debris, but in fact, the data suggests otherwise. The structure of the filament was weak, which is typical for a random meteoritic formation. It had a clear cross-section and signs of high-temperature drawing. Rumors that the artifact was immediately seized by intelligence agencies and sent to classified laboratories still circulate among veterans of polar expeditions. The Antarctic ice acted as a perfect safe, preserving a fragment of technology that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The first mummy. For a long time, it was believed that mummification appeared in Egypt only during the era of the pharaohs, around 2600 BC, along with the pyramids and an established religion. However, in burials from the pre-dynastic period, dating back to 4500–3500 BC, archaeologists discovered bodies preserved by artificial means. These findings have been recorded in the Badari region in Upper Egypt, and they do not fit the explanation of natural mummification by sand. Analysis of the tissues showed the presence of resins, vegetable oils, and antiseptic substances that were deliberately applied to the body before burial. In that year, chemical analysis confirmed that the composition of these mixtures is almost identical in function to those that would be used in classical mummification 1,500 to 2,000 years later. This means that people were experimenting with body preservation long before the appearance of priests, texts, and religious canons. It's also important that such burials are not isolated cases. Traces of body treatment have been found in several burial sites at once, which indicates a repeated practice rather than an exception. The body is placed in a specific position, wrapped in cloth, and treated with substances that slow down decomposition. All this was done during a period when Egypt was not yet a state and did not have centralized authority. These findings show that the idea of preserving the body arose as a practical measure, not as a regional dogma. Later, a complex system of beliefs about the soul, judgment, and the afterlife formed around this practice. But initially, mummification was an experiment that turned out to be so important that it survived for thousands of years and became one of the foundations of Egyptian civilization. The abyss of the Denman Glacier. The Denman Glacier in East Antarctica hides the deepest point on land on Earth. Research in 2026 conducted using next-generation radars confirmed that beneath this ice flow, there is a canyon with a depth reaching 3,500 meters below sea level. For comparison, this is almost 10 times deeper than the shores of the Dead Sea. But what attracted scientists' attention was not so much the scale of the depression, but the abnormal thermal readings at its bottom. Seismic sensors recorded stable vibrations at the base of the canyon and water temperature that is 4 degrees higher than at the surface. This indicates the presence of a powerful influx of geothermal energy or a hidden circulation system that supports life in complete isolation. In the same year, deep-sea probes transmitted data indicating the presence of complex organic matter in this trench, whose genetic profile differs by 30% from all known marine species. Today, the Denman Abyss is called a time capsule, where, due to the colossal pressure and the specific chemistry of the water, evolution could have taken a completely different path. The fact that the bottom of this canyon is just a few hundred kilometers from the South Magnetic Pole makes it an ideal place to search for artifacts that could have been preserved in their original state for millions of years. Labyrinths where there is nothing to look for. Germany, present day. While preparing the site for the construction of wind turbines, archaeologists came across an ancient Neolithic ditch that is more than 6,000 years old. But when they began the excavation, a massive stone slab was discovered in the layers of prehistoric earth. The researchers froze in anticipation. Usually such slabs cover the rich burials of chieftains. But when the stone was lifted, there was neither gold nor bones underneath. There was only a black void. The archaeologists discovered an Erdstall, one of the most mysterious types of underground structures in Europe. It's a narrow, winding tunnel carved into solid ground during the late Middle Ages. Just think about these dimensions. The height of the passage is just over a meter. The width is only 50 to 70 centimeters. An adult can't even turn around here, only crawl forward in complete darkness. The tunnel goes deep for dozens of meters, twisting and winding. So, what's the main oddity? There is nothing in these tunnels that would indicate their use. There is no soot from torches on the walls, no niches for storing grain or wine. There are no traces that anyone ever lived here. In the tunnel under Rainstedt, they found only a horseshoe, a fox skeleton, and a layer of charcoal at the bottom. The creepiest part is that the entrance was purposefully sealed from the inside with heavy stones at its narrowest point. Scientists have puzzled over their purpose for centuries. Shelters, but they have no ventilation. If the enemy finds the entrance, the tunnel turns into a mass grave. Prisons are too complicated to build. Ritual paths for souls is the most popular theory. Local legends call them holes to the underworld. It was believed that through such narrow passages, the souls of the dead would leave for the other world, or, on the contrary, evil spirits would try to get out. Archaeologists from the LDA agency noticed an important detail. This tunnel was built right inside a pagan burial mound that was already 3,000 years old at the time. The medieval builders specifically chose a place that had a bad reputation. Perhaps they believed that an ancient curse would protect their hiding place. Or maybe they were trying to lock something ancient and evil deep underground. The Erdstall tunnels remain one of the greatest mysteries of archaeology. Why spend years of backbreaking labor to carve out tunnels in the ground where you can't even stand up straight? The answer may have always remained there, behind the sealed walls in the silence of the German fields. The geometric tunnels of the Ross Glacier. The technological breakthrough of 2026 allowed researchers to look where no ray of light had ever reached before. Autonomous deepwater drones equipped with next-generation sonars were launched under the Ross Ice Shelf. What they transmitted to the surface instantly turned the mission from an oceanographic one into an archaeological sensation. At a depth of hundreds of meters beneath the icy shell, giant cavities were discovered that look nothing like the result of chaotic currents. The walls of these tunnels look suspiciously smooth, and in some places the radars detected clear geometric lines and right angles. Unlike natural caves, which usually have jagged edges and constrictions, these structures maintain a stable cross-section for many kilometers. The scale of this network is astonishing. It goes deep into the continent, forming a complex system that resembles the transportation or electronic communications of a huge metropolis. Official reports call these features the result of thermal erosion of the ice, but hydrodynamic models show that water is not capable of carving such perfect rectangular shapes. The biological discoveries inside these voids have attracted particular interest. Hundreds of kilometers from the open ocean, in complete darkness and under immense pressure, drones recorded complex organisms resembling deep-sea shrimp and jellyfish. This means that a stable environment with a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients has formed inside the ice tunnels. Some independent experts suggest that these cavities are artificially maintained and are part of an abandoned yet still functioning ancient infrastructure.
Старейшие двери Рима.
The bronze doors of the Pantheon in Rome were cast during the reign of Emperor Hadrian around 115 AD and remain in place to this day. Each leaf is about 7.6 meters high and more than 2 meters wide. The construction is made from solid bronze crafted in a workshop and is designed for precise weight balance. The hinges, fittings, and proportions allowed the doors to be used daily without any additional mechanisms. The surface has preserved traces of time, but the geometry and functionality have remained unchanged. These doors were originally created as part of an architectural ensemble, not as a decorative element. Their production required large casting molds, precise calculations, and access to significant resources. The doors continue to serve their function, having been in active use for almost 2,000 years. Human imprints in the coffin. In Roman Britain, archaeologists have discovered burials that immediately stand out from the usual pattern. About 1,800 years ago, the bodies of the deceased here were covered with a thick gypsum-like mixture, pouring it directly into stone and lead sarcophagi. The material would harden, molding to the body's shape like the Pompeii cast, but that wasn't the main point. While clearing out one of these sarcophagi, researchers noticed clear fingerprints left on the surface of the gypsum. The traces of the hand that smeared and pressed the mixture by hand were preserved inside the coffin and remained hidden until the layer began to be scanned in 3D. This is a rare case where archaeologists record not just a ritual, but the direct physical action of a specific person. Previously, it was believed that the gypsum was poured in a very hot state, but the prints showed that the material was soft and pliable, which means it was applied slowly, touching the body and the walls of the coffin. The traces are located along the inner edges, as if someone was carefully smoothing the surface. Researchers hope to find out who this hand belonged to. There is a chance that traces of DNA have been preserved in the gypsum, but the likelihood is low. One thing is clear for now: this method of burial required close and prolonged contact between the living and the dead. Worked obsidian at a depth of 1 kilometer. If the metal wire from the 60s still leaves room for debate about space debris, then the 2025 discovery in the Antarctic mountains hits the mark exactly. During deep drilling at just over 1,000 meters, a fragment of black volcanic glass, obsidian, was extracted from the ice sheet. However, this was not just a piece of rock. After cleaning the sample in sterile laboratory conditions, scientists discovered traces on its surface that could not be attributed to natural processes. The surface of the stone showed signs of deep mechanical polishing and microscopic grooves running at a strictly defined angle. Such processing is characteristic of cutting tools, but not of a random rock fragment. The problem for mainstream science lies in 2 facts. First, there are no obsidian outcrops within hundreds of kilometers from the drilling site. The stone was brought there by someone intentionally. Second, the layer of ice in which it was found has been forming for 200,000 years. According to the accepted chronology, during this period, the ancestors of modern humans had just begun to master the simplest stone hand axes in Africa. There could be no question of any human presence in Antarctica, let alone technologies for fine stone polishing. Geologists tried to explain the find as natural chipping under the pressure of a glacier, but microscopic analysis showed no chaotic cracks. On the contrary, the grooves had the same depth and spacing, which is characteristic of manual or machine work. This polished obsidian is a problematic artifact. It proves that 200,000 years ago, when the continent was already partially covered with ice, someone was here who was able to work hard stone at a level comparable to the late Neolithic, or even higher. Once again, the ice acted as a time capsule, preserving an object that directly points to the existence of intelligent activity in Antarctica, long before the first civilizations known to us appeared.
Ідоли із іла.
When only an overgrown ditch remains of an abandoned pond, an excavator usually comes to restore nature. Workers clean the bottom, remove silt, and shape the banks. And it is at such moments that archaeologists find something from the past. Under a meter-thick layer of dense silt, archaeologists uncovered several stone figures, with pronounced shoulders, a hint of a head, and slits instead of eyes. In some places you can see polishing, in others, chips. On one surface there are traces of ochre, as if it was once painted before a ritual. Stylistically, this is not garden decor, but classic anthropomorphic idols that were placed on riverbanks and crossroads at different times. The age can range from the late Neolithic to the early Iron Age. The laboratories will determine it, but the context itself says a lot. The figures stood by the water, symbolizing transitions. From one shore to another, from the settlement to the field, from the living to the ancestors. The silt here served as a vault. There is little oxygen in the water, so the surface did not weather. The carvings are easier to make out than on exposed stones. There are wear marks on the ends, which suggest that they were moved. Perhaps they were relocated several times as the riverbed changed. There are imprints of wooden stakes in the ground. Such an idol was not simply stuck in. It was fastened, supported, and sometimes surrounded with small stones, like at altars. Some theories suggest boundary markers or guarding a crossing, while a broader one sees it as a sign of a public gathering place for rituals or councils. Such finds are also a reminder of responsibility. Dredging often destroys the cultural layer in an instant. Here, they made it in time. They called in specialists, documented everything, and carefully removed it. Now comes conservation microscopy and an attempt to find nearby sacrificial pits or ceramic fragments that will provide a solid date. The Martian guest from Allen Hills, Antarctica, is not only a perfect archive of Earth's history, but also the best collection of extraterrestrial objects on the planet. In 1984, in the Allen Hills area, a search team discovered a meteorite weighing almost 2 kilograms, which was designated ALH 84001. 10 years later, after research, this unremarkable stone triggered the biggest scientific scandal of the century. Analysis of the gas in the sealed glass inclusions inside the meteorite showed that it arrived from Mars about 13,000 years ago, after traveling through space for millions of years. In 1996, a group of NASA scientists led by David McKay published the results of scanning electron microscopy of the stone's inner layers. The images revealed carbonate globules and microscopic structures resembling fossilized bacteria. These formations had a segmented shape similar to terrestrial nanobacteria, but were dozens of times smaller. The publication was so sensational that U.S. President Bill Clinton made a special televised address announcing the possible discovery of evidence of extraterrestrial life. Skeptics in the scientific community later put forward alternative theories, claiming that such structures could have arisen as a result of abiotic processes, that is, without the involvement of living organisms. However, supporters of the biological theory point to the presence of magnetite crystals and chains of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons inside the meteorite, which on Earth are usually products of bacterial activity. What's important is that the meteorite itself is estimated to be 4 billion years old, a time when Mars had a dense atmosphere and liquid water on its surface. The discovery at Wallen Hills turned Antarctica into the main laboratory for astrobiology. The continent's icy shell acts like a sterile safe. Meteorites here are not exposed to chemical effects from soil or moisture, remaining in their original state. ALH 84001 001 remains the most thoroughly studied object in human history. And although debates about the nature of the Martian worms continue to this day, this rock became the first physical evidence that life could have existed beyond our planet. Pyramid of the oldest civilization. The Norte Chico culture, also known as Caral Supe, is considered one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations of the Andes. It existed about 5,000 years ago and achieved significant advances in architecture, agriculture, and social organization. Recently, archaeologists discovered a pyramid-like structure about a kilometer from the sacred city of Caral Supe in the Supi Valley, Peru. The structure is a solid structure with a wide staircase leading to the top. Its walls are decorated with massive vertical stones, which may have had not only a structural, but also a ritual significance. In addition to the pyramid, researchers found 12 public and ceremonial buildings located around the central square, which covers almost 39 hectares. This indicates the existence of a small urban center with administrative and religious functions. 3 platforms have been identified in the pyramid, which indicates a complex architectural tradition associated with Caral. At the Chupachigaro site, archaeologists also discovered a unique geoglyph made in the Sechen style. It depicts a human profile and is probably connected to rituals reflecting access to the region's marine and agricultural resources. An unusual lead coffin was found in the north of Britain, where archaeologists discovered the skeleton of a late Roman period aristocratic woman in a lead coffin, as well as the remains of more than 60 men, women, and children who lived in this region more than 1,000 years ago. This discovery may shed light on one of the key periods in Britain's history, as researchers found representatives of both the late Roman and early Saxon periods with different burial customs. The find was made in Leeds at a site discovered last year near Garforth. The location of the cemetery is being kept secret to protect it from looters. The cemetery was discovered in the spring of last year, not far from the place where late Roman stone buildings and structures in the early Saxon style had previously been found. Among the finds at the cemetery were burials with individual items such as knives and pottery, which indicate early Christian beliefs and Saxon burial customs. Chemical analyses can reveal details about the origin and diet of the buried individuals. After the analyses are completed, the lead coffin is planned to be exhibited at the Leeds City Museum as part of an exhibition on burial customs around the world. Zombie grave. In a recently discovered burial site near Oppen in Saxony-Anhalt, Germany, archaeologists found surprising Bronze Age artifacts connected to ancient superstitions. The grave contained the remains of a man laid on his side, with his legs pinned down by a heavy stone about 1 meter long and 50 centimeters wide. In this way, those who buried him tried to prevent him from returning to the world of the living. According to the head of the excavation, Uwe Moas, the man aged between 40 and 60 was positioned facing east, which indicates the cultural rituals of that time. Moas suggests that the deceased either suffered from a serious illness or was not respected among his own people. It is claimed that the man could have been part of the bell beaker culture, which is characterized by a certain style of pottery. In those distant times, people sincerely believed in the existence of revenants, the dead who sought to return to the world of the living. The means of fighting them were varied, from piercing bodies with spears to placing heavy stones on the bodies to prevent them from rising from the dead. Thousands of years
Молчание. Тысячи лет
kept the secrets of ancient Thebes, today Luxor, until archaeologists once again looked beneath its centuries-old dust. In recent excavations near the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut, scientists discovered a system of tombs up to 3,600 years old, and with them, portals into the life and beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. The work has been carried out with the participation of the Foundation and the Supreme Council of Antiquities of Egypt since the fall of 2022. Among the finds are bronze coins with the profile of Alexander the Great, children's toys made of fired clay, various ornaments, winged scarabs, and even carved beads. Here, a part of the Temple of Hatshepsut carved into the rock, Middle Kingdom tombs, and the remains of the Osasef necropolis from the Ptolemaic period were also discovered. The burial shafts date back to the 17th dynasty. In one of them, there was a wooden coffin with the remains of a child. All of this helps us better understand how people lived, believed, and died. A special find is the tomb of Jehu Times, a courtier associated with Queen Titisheri. The inscription indicates that the burial dates back to the 9th year of the reign of Amos I. The war boughs found here may suggest that the owner served as a soldier and fought during the expulsion of the Hyksos. In November of the same year, another tomb from the Middle Kingdom era was discovered nearby, containing 11 sealed burials. Archaeologists are certain that Luxor still holds many similar surprises. Every new artifact, whether it's beads or a battle bow, subtly lifts the veil on the culture and history of pharaonic Egypt. The Antarctic Sphinx. One of the most discussed discoveries in recent years is an object in the area of a mountain range. At coordinates 74 degrees 10 minutes south latitude and 164 degrees east longitude, researchers call it the Antarctic Sphinx. The structure is colossal in size, about 2 kilometers long and over 300 meters high. When looking at high-resolution satellite images, the resemblance to the Egyptian Sphinx seems uncanny. The object clearly shows the outlines of a head, broad shoulders, and a distinctive protrusion resembling the ritual headdress of ancient pharaohs. The comparison in scale is striking. If the Egyptian Sphinx in Giza is 73 meters long, its Antarctic counterpart is 27 times longer. The official scientific explanation states that what we see is a yardane, a geological formation created by centuries of wind erosion. The wind in this part of the continent reaches speeds of 300 km/h, and according to geologists, it simply carved this peculiar shape out of the rock. However, mathematical analysis of the object's facial symmetry shows that its features are too proportional for the random chaos of natural forces. In 2025, an independent group of researchers using thermal scanning data discovered a large cavity beneath the head of this structure. Its volume is estimated at 40,000 cubic meters. The entrance to this chamber is an almost perfect rectangle about 10 meters wide, which is now hidden under a 40-meter layer of compacted snow. This discovery recalls legends of the Hall of Records, said to be hidden under the Sphinx's paws in Egypt. Perhaps in Antarctica, we are not just seeing a quirk of nature, but the original prototype, a monument in whose image the sanctuaries of the ancient world were built. The object's strict east orientation matching its Giza counterpart nearly rules out accidental geological weathering. The mysterious grave, 157. During the excavations in the eastern part of Croatia, in the settlement of Rečeša, archaeologists discovered a mysterious medieval burial, which was named Grave 157. It attracted attention because of its unusual location and terrifying ritual features. The tomb was located under the floor of an ancient church along the southern wall, and massive stones lay on the remains of the deceased, which, according to researchers, may have been placed there specifically to prevent his possible resurrection. This fact, as well as the unusual position of the body, led to the assumption that the burial was connected to a belief in vampires. Anthropological analysis showed that the remains belonged to a man aged 40 to 50 years who performed hard physical labor during his lifetime. However, the most mysterious thing is the deliberate damage to the skeleton. His torso was turned downward and his head was separated from his body. Such unusual burial practices have previously been found in Europe and were more often associated with fear of the dead who might come back to life. The historical context also adds special significance to the discovery. The settlement of Rečeša existed from the 13th to the 16th century, and at first belonged to the Templars, then to the Order of Hospitallers, and later passed into the hands of the local nobility. Over 15 years, archaeologists have discovered 181 burials here. In some graves, traces of unusual burial rituals were found, including decapitated bodies and dislocated bones. This indicates ancient superstitions and fears. Analysis of historical sources confirms that even after the adoption of Christianity in Slavic countries, belief in evil forces continued to persist. Awakening after 40,000 years. While we search for traces of technology in Antarctica, the permafrost of Siberia has proven that ice is not a cemetery, but a waiting room. In the lower reaches of the Kolyma River, At a depth of 40 meters, scientists discovered the nematode worm Vita Panagrolimus colomaiensis. Radiocarbon analysis showed an age of 46,000 years. All this time, the organism was in a state of cryptobiosis, a deep hibernation in which all life processes stop. In the laboratory, researchers were able to bring the worm back to life. It turned out that the secret to such long-term survival lies in earthly mechanisms for synthesizing the sugar trehalose, which protects cells from being destroyed by ice crystals. This tiny organism became the absolute record holder among multicellular creatures, making a leap from the Pleistocene era to the present day. But that was just the first unusual sign. In 2026, it became known that entire microbial communities had awakened from a permafrost core in Alaska. Bacteria that were 40,000 years old not only came back to life after thawing, they also began actively decomposing organic matter. This proves that what is stored in the planet's icy shells are not just individual organisms, but preserved ecosystems. Such a discovery turns revival from permafrost into a frightening tool. Essentially, we are conducting a natural experiment that tests the limits of life over time. It makes you wonder what other biological archives from the past might be activated as global ice continues to thaw. The preserved body. In 1719, at the Falun copper mine in Sweden, miners made a sinister discovery. From a flooded section, they brought out the body of a man without legs, but it was astonishingly well preserved. Judging by his clothes and appearance, it seemed that he had died just a few days ago. It looked very strange considering that the abandoned mine had not been used for many years. The body was put on public display, hoping to find relatives or acquaintances. Soon, Margareta Olsdater appeared, claiming that the man before her was her fiancé, who had disappeared 42 years ago. When the water was pumped out, it turned out that the deceased had been soaked in a solution of vitriol, copper sulfate, which preserved his remains from rapid decomposition. However, as the body dried out, this natural preservation caused the body to become petrified and then to disintegrate. Alas, the fate of the unfortunate man did not end with a simple burial. The local residents, shocked by such a rare phenomenon, kept his body on display for the public for another 30 years. Only then was he buried in a church. After some time, during another reconstruction, the body was discovered again. This time, they decided to finally lay him to rest in the city cemetery. Antarctica's lead trace. When researchers managed to accomplish the nearly impossible and drill through the ice sheet all the way to the bedrock, they gained access to glacial silt. This layer of mud and sediment preserves the chemical composition of the atmosphere and soil from the time when the continent was still green. In 2026, while analyzing samples taken from beneath the Totten Glacier in East Antarctica, geochemists encountered an anomaly that cannot be explained by natural causes. A sharp, sudden increase in the concentration of lead and copper was found in the samples of bottom silt. According to the accepted chronology, this layer formed millions of years ago, long before not only the emergence of industry, but even the appearance of the Homo sapiens species itself. However, isotopic analysis of these metals produced an unambiguous result. The lead and copper had been subjected to high-temperature processing. Simply put, they had been smelted. The presence of such man-made inclusions in layers this ancient is a real disaster for mainstream archaeology. The smelting of metals involves large-scale use of fire, the construction of furnaces, and, logically, the mining of ore. If all these processes took place in Antarctica in ancient times, then the entire history of humanity as a species is just a cover-up for the real events. The scale of pollution recorded under the Totten Glacier indicates serious industrial production. A comparative analysis with ice cores from Greenland, where traces of metallurgy from ancient Rome are recorded, showed that the Antarctic trace is much stronger. This suggests that the ancient civilization of Antarctica had energy capacities comparable to our era. Once again, the ice acted as a perfect safe, preserving the chemical signature of the industry that was erased from the Earth's surface millions of years ago. And now, by extracting this silt from a depth of 3 kilometers, we obtain irrefutable evidence that beneath our feet lies the foundation of a civilization that surpassed us long before our appearance. In Andover, Buckinghamshire, archaeologists working on the HS2 railway construction site discovered the largest Anglo-Saxon cemetery with rich burials from the 5th and 6th centuries. The cemetery contains 138 graves, including 141 inhumations, and 5 cremation burials, as well as traces of activity from the Neolithic, Bronze, Iron Ages, and the Roman period. Many of the burials contain brooches on the collarbones, indicating clothing such as cloaks and peplos. A pair of small square brooches, similar to the well-known Chesildown brooch, were also found. Special attention was drawn to a woman buried with a large number of valuable items, including a glass bowl of Roman origin, copper alloy rings, a silver zoomorphic ring, brooches, and ivory artifacts. Some items may have been imported from abroad, including amber beads and various materials. 2 glass conical cups were also found, similar to vessels from northern France. This discovery provides a unique insight into the lifestyle and culture of Anglo-Saxon Britain. Giants of the icy past. Let's start with facts that make us look at the biology of this region differently. Seymour Island, located off the coast of the Antarctic Peninsula, has long been a mecca for paleontologists. But one discovery stands out from the rest. Here, the bones of a creature were discovered that was officially named Paleodiptes klakoski. This is not just another extinct species. It's a penguin that stood over 2 meters tall and weighed around 120 kilograms. To give you a sense of scale, a modern emperor penguin barely reaches the waist of such a giant. Imagine a bird the size of a professional basketball player that ruled these shores. Researchers from the Argentine Museum of La Plata, studying the joints of the wings and leg bones, concluded that it was a perfect hunter, capable of staying underwater much longer than any of its modern relatives. But why is this important for our story? Archaeology and paleontology go hand in hand here. The presence of such gigantic life forms indicates that Antarctica's ecosystem in the past was not just rich, it was abundant. The enormous amount of food and completely different temperature conditions allowed evolution to create giants. For us, this is an important marker. If nature created birds as tall as humans, then what other surprises could have been hidden in that ecosystem? Some independent researchers are asking a question that official science tries to ignore. If the fauna was so large, could other inhabitants of this continent, those who stood at the top of the food chain, have matched these sizes as well? Antarctica of that time was a world of giants, and the discovery on Seymour Island is just the first page in the archive that we are only beginning to open. A giant stone sarcophagus. This sarcophagus belonged to the powerful pharaoh Ramesses III, who ruled Egypt during the 20th dynasty. It is a true masterpiece of ancient Egyptian sculpture and ritual art. The massive stone coffin is covered with carefully engraved symbols and scenes from the Book of the Dead, which were meant to help the pharaoh pass through the afterlife and achieve eternal life. On its side walls are depicted protective goddesses, such as Isis and Nephthys, spreading their wings, symbolizing divine patronage and protection. The hieroglyphic inscriptions tell of the deeds of Ramses III and his connections with the gods. Interestingly, this sarcophagus was reused by priest kings of the 21st dynasty, which shows when royal tombs began to be reused in the later period. Today, this great sarcophagus is kept in the Louvre, where thousands of visitors can see it.
Сидящее захоронение.
And a children's necropolis. In the French city of Dijon, archaeologists have discovered a unique burial site of the Gauls that is more than 2,000 years old. The uniqueness of the find is that all the deceased are seated facing west. This rare ritual is known from only a few sites in France and Switzerland. The excavations were carried out in the garden of an old monastery, where archaeologists came across 13 burials. The deceased are seated with their hands on their torsos and their legs arranged asymmetrically. The burials date to between 450 and 25 BC. Researchers suggest that these graves may have contained priests, chiefs, or members of the same family. Next to these burials, a children's necropolis from the 1st century AD was found, where 22 infants were buried, many of whom did not live even a year. Some of the children were buried in wooden coffins, as evidenced by the nails that were found. Coins and ceramics were also discovered in the graves, probably as burial offerings. However, part of the cemetery was destroyed due to agricultural work. The reason for the seated burial remains a mystery. One theory is connected to the belief in the afterlife. It is possible that the deceased were meant to enter the afterlife in a special posture. Other researchers believe that this is part of a spiritual practice. The posture could have symbolized meditation or eternal peace. This is supported by Celtic figurines found in different parts of Europe. Laser cutting. When you stand next to the Egyptian megaliths, the first thing that strikes you is the scale. But if you look closer, what is even more surprising is not the size, but the precision. Some stone blocks, especially in the temples of Osiris in Abydos and in the underground gallery of the Serapeum, are crafted with such precision that even a modern laser would be envious. Right angles, perfectly smooth surfaces, traces of circular drilling with identical spacing, as if they were cut according to a template on a CNC machine. In Saqqara, there are so-called boxes made of pink granite, each weighing more than 70 tons. They are not just perfectly polished. Inside, they have a mirror-like surface and a 90-degree angle. Try to replicate that by hand with copper tools. Even diamond blades today won't achieve such a result without a long finishing process. But this was done 4,000 years ago or even earlier. Some blocks in Giza have both convex and concave surfaces at the same time. There's not a drop of mortar between them, yet the gap is thinner than a blade. How did they work them if copper can't cut granite? What did the Egyptians use to cut? There are hypotheses. Vibrational technology, sound cutting, unknown melting methods, all of them sound like science fiction. But the stone surface itself isn't made up. It exists and it's polished. A mummy with tattoos that surprised everyone. In the Ghibelline area, south of Finn, several pre-dynastic mummies were discovered, dating to around 3,300–3,200 BC. For a long time, they were considered ordinary finds until a re-examination revealed dark spots on their skin. At first, they were thought to be stains or traces of decomposition. Later, it became clear that these were tattoos. On the man's body, images of a wild bull and a ram are clearly visible. The lines are clear and the figures recognizable. Pigment was injected under the skin. These aren't random marks or decorative patterns. The images are placed to be visible during life. These are some of the earliest known tattoos in the world, confirmed archaeologically. On another female mummy, geometric and linear patterns were found. They are located on the shoulder and back and repeat each other like a system of signs. The technique of application is the same. The pigment is probably charcoal. It was injected into the skin using sharp tools. The traces of punctures are still visible. It's important that these tattoos are not unique to a single body. They are made using a similar technique and have a similar level of detail. This means that they were done by people who already knew how to do it, not by those experimenting for the first time. The pyramids of the Ellsworth Mountains complete our list of sites in the Ellsworth Mountains, which become the final point in any discussion about Antarctic anomalies. While official reports call them ordinary nunataks, meaning peaks of rocks sticking out of the glacier, the dry numbers and geometry make us doubt that. We are talking about massive structures with a perfect four-sided shape, whose faces are oriented along the north-south and west-east axes, with an accuracy comparable to the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. However, the scale here is completely different. The height of these objects reaches 1 kilometer, which makes them 5 times taller than any known ancient structures. The slopes of these structures have an exact 45-degree angle, which is extremely rare in nature. Usually, ice and wind erosion creates jagged and asymmetrical shapes, but here we see mirror-like precision. Researchers are particularly interested in the magnetic pulses that are periodically detected around these peaks. The rock, consisting mainly of granite and sandstone, does not have the properties to generate such signals. Additional spectral analysis showed that the surface of these objects differs in composition from the floating ridge. It gives the impression that this is either an artificial facing or completely foreign elements embedded in the mountain range even before the onset of glaciation. The mathematical probability that 3 massive peaks would randomly align in a perfect line and take the shape of tetrahedrons is negligible. If these structures are indeed of artificial origin, then we are looking not just at architectural monuments, but at nodes of a global navigation or energy system, the scale of which humanity is only beginning to comprehend. In this case, Antarctica is not just the site of a discovery, but the foundation for something far more grandiose than our entire modern civilization. These giants continue to rise above the icy desert, reminding us of times when the sixth continent played a key role in managing planetary processes. Antarctica is clearly hiding more than we are being told. History textbooks will have to be rewritten. It's only a matter of time. Thank you for watching this video until the end. Subscribe, we'll be back soon.